Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
All right. How was your last week? How did that go?
Oh yeah. There was 2 midterms.
Oh, wow.
They're fine.
How are you doing? You think you're doing pretty well? Or?
I don't know. Both compacted time. Yeah, but I finished it.
Oh, good. Well, congratulations. Yeah.
I think they won't be bad. I don't know if that's okay. Because I don't really have time to recheck the stuff.
Oh, okay. Oh, is that like a take home?
No.
Oh, okay.
In class.
In class, okay. Yeah. We're just waiting for everyone else.
So you presented last week.
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw a slide.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty. Just some work that I had been doing. It's not really fully formed yet, but I just wanted to present something to the group.
So, is it like to investigate the connection in terms of like pathfinding?
Yeah, like
actually, I'm not fully understand the slides.
Okay.
But,
yeah, I was like trying to figure out how the connectome. Well, the first part was how the connectome comes, like wires together, sort of. What are the most efficient paths? And then the second one was actually something a little bit different, which was, what kinds of like coherent sets of cells form. This is a little bit more developmental question, but what kinds of coherent sets of cells form using the Euler path heuristic. So when you draw an Euler path between each cell or not, and then it would provide like a heuristic for development.
Cool.
Yeah. Hi, Ankit. How are you?
Hi.
Okay. Just wait maybe one more minute before we get started. There's Jesse. Hi, Jesse.
Morning.
Hi.
Evening here in India.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're in different time zones. Well, welcome to the meeting. And glad you could make it. And like I said in the email, we have 2 items today. So the first is Ankit is going to show us. He wanted to put together some materials on his project so he could showcase it. Different people were interested in funding and other opportunities. So I suggested that he create a sort of a presentation that would showcase what's going on. And so he's going to do that. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the paper. I haven't made any more progress on it this week, but we can still refresh it in our minds what's going on there. So, Ankit, if you want to start, I'm going to share your screen. Yeah. I should ask, does anyone have any questions before we start? Or?
Yeah, exactly.
Like questions in general, or?
Anything.
No, I'll say a little more when we talk about the paper than that.
Okay, yeah.
So, how it present now?
Yeah, share your screen, see if it works. Yeah, I see it.
So I actually completed the things that I started last week. So so actually, since we people are very much familiar with breaking the vehicle, so I'll not go into the details of what breaking the vehicle is. Rather than I'll go about how I have done and implemented the issue. So yeah, so this if everyone knows what this is about. It's continuation of the GSOC project and things like that. And I've used processing for the thing and everything written. The code that I have written is completely based on the ideas in the book that we have here, the Brittenberg book that we have. So, and the second thing is like talking about what will be the final outcome of the project. I think it's important that we know that in which direction we are moving and what's the final outcome. So the way things are going on, I feel like it will be a kind of a intelligent and autonomous system of vehicles which are like sufficient, which can make decisions, which can be good in decision making given the environmental stimuli that are around. So we have there are two types of things that can happen. Firstly, we predefine the behaviors of the vehicles, which is what I have done till now. And the second thing is like based on what stimulus is around, we can make the vehicles behave in the way we want, or specific to some stimulus. There is some kind of behavior specific to that stimulus. So this is what should be the total outcome, and also this can be viewed as an intelligent swarm. The vehicles, the system of vehicles, the group of vehicles. If we incorporate some we have already given the vehicles the meanings or some set of rules. If we can integrate something like how the vehicles are interacting within themselves, then maybe we can see some more interesting swarm-like behaviors. So that is yet to be done. So I'll move on with the next slide. This is the like basic information about Brittenberg vehicles I took from Wikipedia. This is the model that I have created, the image. And the important thing is something I took from the book, which is they are saying that in the book it's very much evident that they are taking a bottom approach to see some emergent behavior. We don't know what can come out of that thing, but we are just taking a pair of sensors and actuators or motors and just tweaking the things. And there are basically two factors. One is the activation function, and second is the wiring. So based upon how we vary that, then we get to know about a lot of behaviors which are emergent. So another good thing that I found in the book was like it's like we are creating some complex systems, but actually it is made up of very small things. It is essentially happening everywhere. Like everything is made up of so much small things, but when they are joined together or they are integrated together, we get to know about some very complex behavior that is coming out. So if we go by this analysis, saying that suppose if we see some like if anyone doesn't know how this coordinates behavior in the vehicle is there. Like if I run the simulation and people will feel like it's a good thing, and it looks like a very complex thing. But if we go by this approach, that how could this be done, it will be much more difficult than just like tweaking the sensory activation and wiring rules, and then we see some different kind of behaviors evident. So this is the like main theme of the book, which was there. And environment, here I'll go about what I have done till now. So my environment consists of multiple number of vehicles and different kinds of stimuli. Till now I have not integrated different kind of stimuli. I have just one kind of stimuli, which is kind of image snips roaming around, but I have planned to do integrate some other type of vehicles, other type of stimuli. And in my environment, you will see different kind of vehicles scattered around. So this is like the snip of code when I execute things. So what it says is, yeah, you see this. Initially, the vehicles are appearing throughout the window at randomized positions. Thereafter, and this the stimulus, which is this image, is roaming around, which has nothing to do with these any of the properties of these vehicles. Like this stimulus is independently roaming around this environment with some randomized speed and location, which is initially it appears within the window. So if you see how I execute the code, I've coded it in such a way that I put maximum number of stimuli 1. So I think it's very much evident how it is happening. So for the time being, in this case, I have only one stimulus, but I have other snips which will show multiple stimulus in the environments. So yeah. So anybody has to say something about this? Hello.
I was looking at actually I'll say something. I was looking at the slides and I saw that, yeah, I think it's nice that like you can actually look at the behaviors in the animations you provided in the slides and see like these different behaviors.
Yeah, so that is just about to come. So before that, these things are like I have like what I have done, I just wrote it down so that it can be everybody knows what exactly is happening. So initial positions are also randomly generated, and movement of stimuli are also randomly generated. So yeah, this is it. So this is now the important thing is the wiring. I said earlier that there are two factors which characterize the particular vehicle. Basically, every vehicle is looking similar, but based upon the wiring rules and activation rules, we can see different emergent behaviors coming out of them. So for the time being, we have only two simple monotonous kind of activation functions, which I have like assumed of my own, and actually they are working pretty well as far as the emergent behaviors are concerned. Based upon how it is given in the book, so it is exactly matching. So it's kind of a monotonous function. You see, the more the less, and here the more the distance, the more is the activation. So I think I should put a multiplication sign here. This is a mistake. So yeah. So the wiring rules are, and the variable here is only the distance between the vehicles. This activation is like the distance is the distance between the sensor and the stimulus position. So in the code, I have taken at each instant the instantaneous coordinates of the sensors and stimulus and calculated the activation function, and thereafter how the activation is transferred to the motor wheels, and thereafter the speed that I will talk about in my kinematics section, how things are done. So yeah, basically I've said everything I want to say here. Yeah, so this is my vehicle. This is the sensor, like the antenna, and this is the sensory sensor tip. Like I'm calculating the distance between the stimulus. Suppose the stimulus is here, then I'm calculating the distance between this place and this place, and this place and this place. So there's a difference in the activation, and then these activation are directly transferred to these motor wheels. So in this case, this will be perhaps, yeah, this will be vehicle 2A and 3A. And like one thing is the wiring rules, which is parallelly wired in this case. And if we like that, if there's a positive sign here which says that the activation is non-inhibited, then it will be vehicle 2A, and if it is inhibited, then it will be vehicle 3A. So based upon that, we see some kind of emergent behavior. So the first kind of activation function is used in 1A, 2A, 2B, because this is non-inhibited activation. And the second kind of activation, which is there should be a multiplication sign here. So this kind of thing will be used in these kind of vehicles. And as we move further in different vehicles, then different activation functions will be used, because these are kind of monotonous functions. So later on, we might use some like bell curve type functions, which say that like if the activation increases, then the vehicle speed will be like the vehicle activation will vary, and that will result in some more even complex behavior. So, and the second thing is while coding, I've defined some set of some weights. How like every time this there is some activation, at least here at these tips. So how these activations are transferred to the vehicle, the wheels of the vehicle. So wheel motors. So in case of parallelly wired, I have set the weights W1, W2, W3, W4 to 1100. So in this case, if we assign this, so we'll get the effect due to parallelly wired things. So what happens is, suppose the activation here is A1, A2, and it is we want it to be vehicle 2A. So what we do is we multiply A1 into W1 and A2 into W2. So we'll get it, and also at the same time, since I have put these other weights to 0, the effect due to these cross connections will be nullified. So another thing that I think I talked about earlier in some meetings, that these things can be non-binary, like they can be a fraction value. So that will come later on, and that might result in some more complex behavior. So I actually checked something like randomizing the weights between 1 and 0. So like you can predict what was the value, what was the weight based upon what the behavior was. So and later on we can surely like randomize these values, or talking about randomized or fraction values, we can like based upon what kind of stimulus is, and we are how much sure that this is this kind of vehicle. So these weights can be fractional based upon the percentage. We are sure that stimulus is provoking that kind of behavior. So hopefully this will be done later on. So yeah. So anybody has to like everyone has understood this what I'm doing with these weights?
Yeah. So I guess I like this idea of being able to make them fractional. So right now they're
Yeah.
binary values, and so there's no thresholding function. But like later on, you could say weight these different connections at different, fractions of 1, and then have either a threshold or just have like the activity, like different components of it. So it would be non-deterministic in that way. Whatever connections are the strongest would be the ones that would dominate, or just be the ones that
Yeah, and actually we have, in every case we'll have only four type of weights, and that may be the very simple thing about that, and how these 4 weights decide the fate of these 4 weights, and the activation function that we're using, that will decide the what kind of behavior will come out of this vehicle, and if there is a group behavior, there might be some difference. So yeah, this is the thing. And here I'll talk about the details, how and why this vehicle is moving in some other direction, and why not in the other direction. So what is happening is, this is my vehicle. So this has got some sensory activation here and here, and based upon the wiring rules, which activation will go to which wheel motor. So suppose this W1 is greater than W2. This omega1 is greater than omega2. So basically what will happen is, because in this case, the more activation, if the more activation is reached to this wheel motor, so the rotating speed of this wheel will be more. So what will happen? This wheel is rotating more as compared to this wheel. So what will happen here is, like taking the ideal case, it will try to be in a circular motion. So like this wheel, it has to, if we can prove this point that this will go like this. So, and here I have written this: if omega1 is greater than omega2, then the vehicle will follow this kind of path. So this kind of path, and this can be very evident, because if you take this case only, then for following this path, this wheel is rotating more, so it has to cover a lot of distance, like larger radius, and this has to cover the smaller radius. So anyway, if it is the rotation speed is slow, then like it will go in this direction. And I have done some calculations, and based upon that, I find that it's very evident that if like it's a kind of a kinematics problem now, that if there's a vehicle, or say there is a car, and the 2 wheels are rotating at a varying speed, so what will be the like linear speed of the vehicle? So the linear speed is basically the, or if we take the rotational speed, so it will be in the horizontal direction, it is basically the average of these 2 wheels, and based upon that there is some radius of these wheels. So if we want to calculate the linear velocities, we can do V equals to R into omega. So this K is basically the constant for this vehicle radius. So if we want to based on how like calibrating these values, we get some good kind of behaviors that we want to. And here actually I have made a mistake, because if it is going in a circular motion, then this is the tangential velocity of the vehicle, and this is the radial acceleration. This should not be the velocity, so this will be the acceleration. So we are calculating the velocity and acceleration of vehicle going in a circular motion at a particular point, but since the activations and these omega1 and omega2 values are changing constantly, this will not follow a perfectly circular path, but some kind of this kind of path. So and these things are calculated based upon the like kinematics rules that we have. So I hope everyone understands this, what I talked about here, why this is going in this direction, this direction.
Yeah, they're the different components of the trajectory. So you have the forward versus the side components, and then you combine them to get the curvature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this is very important. Like if it was the normal case, the two wheels are rotating at the same speed, and it will go in like completely horizontal direction. It has nothing to do with going anyway down or up. But the way why it is deflecting from its straight line path is the difference between the rotation speed, because anyway the vehicle has to the wheel is rotating and there is no slipping between the wheels. So taking the ideal case, this would take this kind of trajectory. So yeah, so that's it about the vehicle kinematics. So I just wanted to make clear the very basic thing that are happening in the vehicle and how I've designed it. So I just made these things. Yeah, and now the what has been done till now, I've created an environment using processing, and we get in the environment we are getting a particular, like one single type of vehicle, and multiple vehicles which are actually behaving of a single kind of, or actually all vehicles are following the same behavior. So if this can be seen in other ways too, like we have the stimulus, all the stimulus are provoking the same kind of behavior. So, and the next slide will be the presentation, like the snips of these two vehicles, like the coord and aggressive. So this snip I think is known to you, why it is this kind of following a path, like to escape this thing. And this is even more interesting if these stimuli are moving, then we'll see that actually wherever these stimulus are going, they are kind of vacating the area, and or otherwise the vehicles are trying to avoid these things and just to stay away from that. So in case of multiple stimulus, we have this kind of behavior. So this thing is known to you people already. So this is the second thing, which is talking about the stagnant case, where like the vehicles are appearing throughout the window everywhere, and these three are the stimulus in this case. So it will appear in some time. Just yeah. So this is 2B, which is aggressive. So the vehicles are kind of just running into the stimulus. As when it is far from the stimulus, there is not much activation, but as they are getting closer, there is much more activation, and they are just hitting into the stimulus and running away from it. So yeah, so you can see this. And the other case, which is in this case, the stimuli are roaming around this thing, and the vehicles are still trying to follow and hit the stimuli and run away. So this looks like a good thing. Anyone has to say anything or any doubts how this thing is working?
I had like a question. So like, it looks like there's a sort of a radial effect. So like, can you go back to the animations, or they're coming back? Okay. Like around the stimulus. So like immediately around the stimulus, are sort of like in the avoidance, which is the coward. There's like a hole, where like the agents sort of avoid the image, but then there's a part farther away in the field where there's no effect. It's like the ones that are black. You signal a line, and then they don't have any real effect relative to the stimulus. So that's, and I think we discussed last week or the week before. It's not really based on an interaction rule. It's just simply like how they're responding to the image.
Yeah, basically when the vehicles are very much away from the stimuli, so there is not much activation in that vehicle, so it is staying still there, or there is very less movement. Obviously there will be some movement, but that is not very much evident. If you see here, the vehicles are kind of still, but when the stimulus is coming nearer to that, then there's some more activation, so you see these becoming white. So uh, that's what is happening. And maybe we can, like in real life, we have some zone of influence of a vehicle, of a stimulus, or any stimulus for that matter. So we can take it like we can like define some zones, like for this stimulus there's a particular radius after which there is no effect. So uh, and there is still some effect which is kind of negligible in this case. So we can think about that. I was actually thinking about doing this kind of thing when I'm doing vehicle 3A with multiple moving stimuli. So I might think about that later.
Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to make the point that, like, so, like, the vehicle 2A, which is coward,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like it's moving like almost like a front of agents that are near that are sort of aligned with the stimulus. So, like, there's a nearest neighbor sort of thing. So, like, if you're right in front of the stimulus, there's a collective behavior that sort of avoids the stimulus. But then if you go further back, maybe way out on the edge of the world, there's no effect. And so, I mean, in a lot of collective behaviors, if you look at like a lot of the literature on flocks and swarms, it's like there'll be some sort of effect, like at the sort of source, and then there's like a collective effect throughout the community. So, like, so this would be sort of analogous to a flock, but it would be like if the leading edge of the flock were shaping things. We still don't really understand how flocks work. I guess I should mention that. But when they've done these simulations of flocks and swarms, they've had the agents interacting, and then they form these coherent sort of shapes. So you'll see birds that fly through the air in big groups, and they'll make these really complicated turns, and everything's coordinated. In this case, it looks like there's a front that's coordinated, but that's basically relative to the stimulus. So, I mean, the question is like, could you exploit the sort of the rules or communication between agents to improve performance, or would that just make things, not relevant to the...
No, actually, that's actually my next agenda. What I will be going to do with this is the interaction between these vehicle itself. So these vehicles, if there is some interaction between the vehicles, then we might see some more interesting patterns, because if you see this case in the real world, it won't be possible for vehicles to just hit on each other. So if I apply some proximity rules that the vehicle, like the one vehicle can't invade the other vehicle space while it is moving. So in that way, I will also like have an influence of one vehicle on another. So that will actually maybe a good point to prove swarm intelligence kind of behavior in this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, it would have to depend, like, I don't know if it would make it any, like, improve the performance or what, but, like, you'd have, definitely relative to the stimulus, there would be some, like, basic rule that says, you either avoid or you flock towards the stimulus, but then agents sort of on the outskirts, they might behave relative to their neighbor agents, so there's sort of this delayed effect. I don't know if that would help in terms of like identifying an image, but it would. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what it would do. There might be some use for it. I'm not really sure exactly at this point what it would be.
Yeah, So just like going by the feelings, how actually the bird flocking must be happening is that there must be some rules that are there in the brains, and actually there are other concerns like not hitting the other birds. So that is we might integrate here, that like having a proximity issue also between the two vehicles. So that must at least improve the performance. And again, like what kind of proximity behavior we are trying to simulate, and depending upon so many things can go different. So
Yeah.
so I'll move on to the next things that are to be done. So actually I'm going by the same thing that I've written in my GSEC proposal. So till now I have coded vehicle 3, so I will try to code vehicle 4 and 5 and so on. Firstly, like pre-wiring the things, so we are sure that like that kind of behavior is actually running successfully, and thereafter we can like randomize the behaviors and see the mixed effect that's there. So yeah, and the second thing that I just talked about, the proximity issues between the two vehicles to ensure that there is no collision. So, and another thing that I would like to work on is the orientation of the vehicles. So if you see here, the vehicles are either left or right. Like here they are since there's a stimulus here, so the vehicles are orienting toward this direction and here in this direction. But actually that creates a complication in the still cases. So I think it's more evident here that there's a problem. So if you see the vehicle, when it is getting here, it is just kind of confused which side to go. So if there was something like the vehicle when it is moving like this, so the vehicle could rotate itself in that direction. So like orient, when it is going like this, it is like sliding downwards. So I just wanted to like orient the vehicle in the direction it is moving. So for that I would have to maybe like multiply with a rotation vector and see if things are working out. Actually I tried out, but it didn't work, and I might try out again and see if it is happening nicely or not. So that is one plan. And now again integrating different kind of stimuli, like the images are looking like good, like they are implemented quite well. I was fearful if we could represent one image in the environment, but these are small snips of the images, and if we put a dog or cat or any other thing that is quite evident that this is a dog, so these vehicles are trying to avoid this. So this will happen when we have multiple type of stimuli. So we have already the image integrated, but I just wanted to integrate more kind of stimuli, which is sound or text. Or another thing is just a simple obstacle of if you see this, I was actually watching some video and I got this idea that if we in this case, if we see this thing as an obstacle, so this thing like these are the vehicles or any agents, and there are obstacles in the way. So this looks like a good implementation to like how would the trajectory be to avoid these obstacles. So in this case, even if this stimuli is roaming around, so it would be tough if for any simple mathematical rules to like plan out some trajectory for the vehicle so that they are like avoiding the vehicle every time. So that would be also in the plan. So talking about sound, how will I integrate sound is I will just in place of these images, I'll just put some sound I can how that is like we can we can select some point and hear actually what the sound intensity, how it is varying when the sound stimuli is moving. That actually happens in the real environment. So and the text maybe some like some words which can provoke different type of behaviors. So like word snips or maybe something like that. We can discuss about this later. So like the idea is to integrate these stimuli in a representable and meaningful form so that we get to know what exactly is happening. So yeah. So and this is the very old idea that I have to make these things identifiable by the vehicle, and thereafter these things will actually result into some kind of labels that this vehicle, this stimulus is provoking this kind of behavior. So basically applying deep learning to these vehicles, so we get to know what kind of behavior that stimulus is provoking. So that's another work. So yeah, and thereafter when we have mixed type of vehicles in the environment, then we might actually in the book they have mentioned about values and memory and things like that. So maybe things something like that can come out of that if the vehicle is like roaming around, so it has a memory that this is a like this like that vehicle should avoid this kind of stimulus, so it doesn't goes in that direction. So still in the plans, so nothing much has been done. So hopefully we can do it later on, and maybe add some more points to make it look like a more intelligent system. So these are the possible implementation. Basically, as of now, I have just come out with predicting of paths of different kind of stimuli. Like you have an environment, and you know that how you have to behave, and thereafter you know then there are some set of rules, and you actually following those set of rules, you are very safe that you won't hit some kind of any stimuli. So maybe like I was just this will be a very small thing, but just taking case of self-driving cars and these vehicles. So I think it can be a good idea. I don't know how it will be in the reality to avoid actually obstacle or any human or any obstacle for that matter. So this seems like a good way how things can be done. So that is just the idea. So I just told, and I've written here how you can set up processing.py on your PC and how to run those things. So just check it out later on. And this acknowledgement, and that's all. And yeah, anybody have to say anything?
Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks. That looked really good. That's a nice deep introduction to it. Looks like Jesse has a question.
Not so much a question, but I really appreciate the presentation because it's sort of it's helping me understand what I want to do with it. I think I definitely will try to set up, set up sort of what you have to test it out myself the way that you've done it, because I think I think I'm more interested in a certain kind of development, but the way that you're explaining things, I'll just say it's very useful, and I appreciate how you're getting into the motives and the challenges for why you're doing what you're doing. I found that very useful.
Yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, talking about the references, I actually I don't have references for that matter. Like I have read the book. I have taken ideas from there. I have used this kind of UI support for the simulation, and these are the Wikipedia links that are there. So actually, everything as far as I remember, I have just read the book and taken down the idea from there and like coded that thing in my as per my understanding. So. And there was a paper that I told that they have some models for vehicle 2A and 2B, or maybe 3A also, but that looked pretty complex. And if I can explain the behaviors by simple rules, simple activation functions here, and the kinematics rules that I have applied here, so what's the need of these complex things if you don't even want them? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think just using working from the rules, because I think when Bradenberg wrote the book, he kind of like classified different, vehicles based on sort of hardwiring them. It was in a way a thought experiment to see if he could get it. Like he wanted to define it, pretty distinctly in the book, but like in terms of implementing one. It's just as well that you just create something like this and just run it and see what, maybe you get behaviors that he didn't classify. That's a thing, the thing with behavior, we try to classify behaviors, and that's largely a product of our own classification system. So if it's like, you have a happy or a sad behavior, well, there are probably a lot of intermediate behaviors that are not as easy to classify, but we can generate them using something like this or some other type of simulation. And that's another advantage too, is that you have this generative approach that would give you things that you may not have thought of before. Next week I may do a kind of a little presentation on swarm intelligence, just to get everyone kind of familiar with the terminology and maybe throw a little behavior in there too, based on that last point, because I think it's good to have like a nice sort of wedge into that literature, because it's not at all sort of intuitive with what's going on, because there's sort of a history to it, and so I'll do that, and then we'll kind of think about it a little bit more. Ziyi, did you have anything to add about the paper or about this presentation?
That's very informative. I am not familiar with deep learning, and I think you have mentioned some about that. So can you just like elaborate it a little bit more? I'm curious.
Okay, so actually, the idea is not yet implemented. It's like firstly doing the pre-wiring, thereafter suppose taking the example that these stimuli appear in the environment, and these stimuli appear in the environment, and there is a already a training, the vehicles, we can say to identify these things, but actually they on the computer or on any virtual system you have like these stimuli are trained to get identifiable. So once you have a deep learning applied to kind of vehicles to like images and sounds and text will be like natural language processing. So getting the tone out of that text to like act in a certain way. So that is actually a later thing to do, but when it will be done, how it will happen is like you have different type of stimuli roaming around, and these vehicles will identify based upon the training, the deep learning training that has been done. So actually there will be some labels assigned to these things instantly, and based upon that these vehicles will like behave. So talking about a very simple case will be like if suppose we have already the training done, so these stimuli are there in the environment, and we get to know that these two or rather, this stimuli is a coordinates provoking stimuli, and this stimuli is a aggressiveness provoking stimuli. So actually, these vehicle will interact with this stimulus in that way. So if this is aggression provoking, so the vehicles will actually run into that, and the second one, if that is covert, so they will actually try to avoid. So basically, that might represent a separate kind of very complex behavior that we may just witness. That's all. Yeah. And one more thing that I wanted to add here is, like, we can see that we can, like, some kind of emotions these vehicles have. So like coordinates is an emotion, aggression is an emotion, and there's love as an emotion. So we are actually, if we see it in that way, then we can, like, establish some kind of emotion in the vehicles, which are very tiny robots. So we can, like, it's a good perspective to see these behaviors as emotional responses, although, and how these emotional responses are, like, are a result of very simple mathematical rules and wiring. So I just thought about that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Well, yeah, one final point on this. I just wanted to make the sort of connection just to think about in, maybe for next week or something, that when you mention that you might have, fractional representations of the connections, it kind of brings up sort of a Hebbian approach. I kind of hinted at it earlier, where, you're sort of weighting connections by their relative contribution, and then doing that over time. I guess, you would have to do that to get a good representation. So, I mean, Ziyi's done some things with the Hebbian learning, so we might talk about that in maybe, upcoming meetings, how that might work.
Yeah.
So that's a thought, too.
Yeah. So I was thinking about that, too, but you mentioned it here. Yes.
Okay.
So anything that can improve this thing will be always welcome for me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ankit. It was very good. We'll talk about it more again later as we go along. So I wanted to talk quickly before we end about the paper. So I'm going to share my screen now.
Yeah, I'll just disconnect now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, yeah. And so I'll just put the paper up on the screen here. I mean, I haven't really done a lot of work on it this week myself. So we have, can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
All right, so we've got, again, the same outline that we had last time. I filled out a little bit of detail here. We still have the same notes in the paper here. I have to work on the references because I threw in some numbers. They don't really mean anything yet. And then I inserted some of Ziyi's things here. I put in equations. Putting in the equations works. And so, I'm trying to divide things up into sort of like an implementation section, a results section, or like a method section, results, which would be implementation, and then like sort of a discussion future plans section. So that's that part. And then there's another part, of course, up further that's sort of lays out our argument and some of the basic models that we're working on. And so I think Jesse had a question about you had a question about our statement about it. Did you want to bring that up now?
Yeah, I think what I don't have that much time to get into it, but I'll just say for now, I've been looking at the paper a bit, and I like it, and I spent some time getting into speaking of the references. One of the papers that you mentioned I guess reference 4 where I had that a little edit there. I really like that paper. It's basically about like a history of simulation. And I think that's I would just say that might be a good paper for. I don't know if that's been mentioned before, but that might be a good paper for anybody to read here because it really is helping me see. I'm very interested in sort of the trajectory of how this fits into, I guess, the history of neuroscience. Okay, but also how, like, kind of a bigger picture perspective on how brain big vehicles are fitting into things. I think that might help in terms of, when people are looking at how does this answer specific scientific questions or research questions, because it takes it. I haven't finished the paper entirely, but the premise of the paper is basically that simulation is the next stage in neuroscience development research, going from philosophical to very basic experimental, and then theoretical stuff, which is what experiments couldn't quite do, and then simulation, getting more and more towards, in a sense, being able to incorporate more and more things that we know work into a unifying function, or a unifying like whole-scale brain simulation. So putting brain reveals as a useful tool in that development, I think, is a very interesting concept, and related to what we're doing here in many different forms. But just that, I really like the perspective that the paper had. So
yeah,
I'll leave it at that for now. But more along those lines later.
Oh yeah, I think that's it's very useful. I think that's actually a good thing to add to the paper. So these references are kind of like we can riff off of these if we need to, like, flesh out the argument. Typically what happens is people pick references and they put them in, and then they go through the reference and they say, well, that's an interesting direction, and then they follow up on it in the paper. So that's a good thing. As for that paper, yeah, that's one of the I put it in the chat here, the reference. So one of these authors, the last author, Henry Markram. So I don't know if you've heard of the Blue Brain Project from IBM.
I did, but I didn't quite know. I looked at it, but I couldn't tell what it is. Can you say more of it?
Yeah, so about 10 years ago, Henry Markram proposed this model of the brain. So it was like he proposed that you could model the entire human brain using computational methods, or in this case it was like a machine where you have like different cores and you can build like a mass simulation, right? And so he got funding from one of the European agencies for this, and he set to work. And it's very controversial. You might run across some information about it where they criticize him very heavily, because they said, well, you can't really simulate the whole brain because we don't have enough information about it. But of course, this is the argument, right, that he's making in the paper, that simulations are useful. Maybe it's not like a strict one-to-one mapping of the brain, but it gives us some insight as to how the brain works, especially at that scale. And so, he's written a bunch of other things on like simulation neuroscience. But just, yeah, I mean, he's been working on this Blue Brain project for many years, and they've had a lot of things spin off of it as a result. And they may not have accomplished their main goal directly, but like with a lot of things like this, you have a lot of derivative products. Mm-hmm. And so, they've learned a lot about, the brain, I think. Another person is Jeff Hawkins, who developed this system called HTM, which is simulating the cortex. A lot of people level the same criticisms at him, like, this isn't really teaching us about the brain. Oh, is that? Oh.
I'm sorry?
Oh. Well, anyways, yeah, so, I mean, it's in that same vein, and so, yeah, I think that's a good observation. Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, well, we can talk about that more later, but I think that definitely is something we can follow up on in the paper. We might go and we might actually look at some of his other references and you know, just to see like what the, because I don't know the history like of how he came to the Blue Brain project, but
yeah, it's interesting because just from what I've seen of the paper so far, there definitely was a sense of, I appreciate the Blue Brain project's context that you gave, because there's definitely it's a review paper, but it's also there's kind of an advocacy element to it. So that makes sense if that's. I didn't know that about Markham. I knew a little bit of the project, but I didn't know that was like his deal. So it kind of makes sense that it was pulling in that direction.
yeah,
Yeah, and I guess the only other thing I was going to say about the paper is I think by next week I'm going to be. I haven't really put much into the paper yet, but I think next week I will be fleshing out a lot more. So, yeah.
yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, and please, yeah, feel free to, you know, you can put, I guess you can put it in the document.
Yes.
You know, put annotations in when you do. If you put in a section, you know, leave a note and say this is meant to be like integrated. Because, you know, we'll move things around, but I want to keep track of if someone puts something in the paper, who put what in. That's just, you know, it's like when you have that many people looking at it and going through it, it's great to have like some annotation there.
Yes.
But yeah, that's good. So, well, we're at the top of the hour. Again, like working on the paper continuously. We're, you know, please read through it if you have time, because you know it's good to have people's feedback on. Even like in Ziyi's case, I added his materials in. He might want to make some changes or want to add in some context to it. I just tried to copy what he had, but like, you know, I moved things around in the structure of the paper. So, and then Jesse, you know, will follow up on the stuff that you mentioned, and then Ankit will follow up on your work, you know, in later meetings. So. Next week, yeah.
So, I just wanted to add, tell that like I've added the documentation on GitHub too, like on my repository. I send you the link on. So I have like documented within Markdown.
Yeah.
So just like in case of Z, if you want to take something out of there to that thing, you're welcome. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and next week maybe like this upcoming week I might be working on this proximity issues to see if we can find anything different, or I can always move on to the next vehicle, which is 4A, 4B, 5. So.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, and like I said, next week I'll probably give a short presentation on like swarm intelligence and behavior, and sort of give people a background on that. So. Well, thanks for attending. We're at the top of the hour. And if you have any other questions, you can put it on Slack or, you know, let me know through email, depending on what it is. And then we'll meet next week.
Yeah. Sounds
okay.
All right. Any other last minute questions or comments?
So I try to give any, you know, comments or stuff. On the hard side, was a part for multi-model integration, yeah.
Okay.
So after that, I would definitely look at those parts. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, it's fine. I mean, we'll just be working on this, you know, it's an ongoing thing, so whenever you have time. All right, well, thanks for meeting, and good luck on your midterm, Ziyi.
Thanks.
Yeah. And talk to you next week.
All right. Take care, everybody.
All right.
Hey, guys.
All right, bye.